Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this year's first Boxock Conservation webinar. We are very delighted that you're joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your time. Tonight's webinar is, of course, about the National Biodiversity Assessment that was launched in December last year. It is a slightly scientific webinar, but our three speakers will be taking you through some of the complexities and the detail in the NBA assessment. So just to introduce our three speakers, if you can switch on your cameras. We've got three representatives from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. Devadine van der Kolff is a senior scientist working with the Threatened Species Program. Devadine has been highly involved in driving the NBA assessment. And then we also have Mapale Monyeki. Mapale is a scientific researcher also with SANBI. And then our third speaker this evening is Hlengiwe. Hlengiwe, sorry, Hlengiwe, you're going to have to forgive me, but you will pronounce your surname later to us when we listen to what you have to cover for us. I just want to thank the three ladies on the screen very much for their time and for taking us through the NBA assessment. So the idea here tonight or this evening is to highlight some of the main findings. It is quite a thick body of work, as you will see. So it is really just meant as an overview this evening with some of the key highlights and findings, and then also an invitation to delve deeper in your free time when you can into some of the more details that the speakers will share with us. So without further ado, I am not going to say too much about the NBA, but very broadly, it speaks to South Africa's sort of national mandate and obligation to feed into the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the global policy space for conservation and biodiversity conservation especially. We will be looking at certain questions like what is the biodiversity in South Africa's at the moment? What is the status? What are the growing threats also? And where do we need to prioritize our resources and our action to make sure that we manage biodiversity effectively and also conserve it, not only sort of from a natural resource perspective, but also for human well-being and the ecological benefits that our society depends on. So I think I'm not going to go into too much of the detail. I would rather at this stage hand over to Devadine. Any of the audience is of course welcome to pop questions in the chat. You're more than welcome to ask questions, and between each speaker we will have a bit of time to see to those questions and to delegate them to the relevant speaker. Devadine, I think if you can unmute yourself, then we look forward to what you have to share with us this evening about the overview of the NBA, the scope, the purpose, and all the people and organizations involved in compiling this body of work.
Thank you, Martina. I'm audible? Good?
You are audible, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martina, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for making the time to be with us tonight and to learn more about the state of biodiversity in South Africa. So I'm also not going to spend too much time, but I'm just setting the scene, and my colleagues Hlengiwe and Mapale will delve deeper into the actual results. Okay, so why are we doing the National Biodiversity Assessment? So Martina just mentioned the Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and South Africa is a signatory to many other multilateral environmental agreements, and these agreements help guide how countries contribute to conserving biodiversity at the global scale, and also guides us what we need to do at the national scale. The NBA also feeds into national reports as well as these other global assessments, the IPBES assessment. So many of our indicators that's developed and calculated within the context of the NBA contributes to these kinds of assessments. The scope of the MBA, so where do we conduct it? Across all of South Africa's territories. So the terrestrial realm, freshwater realm, the marine realm, estuarines, coastal zones, as well as our sub and Arctic territories. We conduct the MBA at 3 different levels. At the ecosystem level that you will hear about shortly, the species level, which look at different taxonomic groups, specifically those that have been red listed, that we have information about where we can assess them, and then also at the genetic level. The purposes of the MBA. So I've just laid out the different levels of assessment, the scope of assessment of the MBA. However, what is the purpose and what does it mean to an ordinary South African people that are interested to contribute to the state or know the state of biodiversity in South Africa? So from the data that's generated, we produce lots of different analyses, and in the next few slides, I'll talk about the timing of those analyses and where they come from. So all of this information is synthesized in this report, and it enables us as a country to make informed decisions. So it supports decision-making across different sectors, so not just the conservation sector. It helps us to prioritize and to plan where conservation efforts need to be focused. It also identifies or highlights benefits to biodiversity. In the 2018 version of the NBA, we had a whole chapter on benefits of biodiversity, and it also provided an actual monetary value of biodiversity to people and the country. So along eco-driven jobs, as well as where we secure or protect catchment areas, and that service and that provides water to many South Africans. So it's not just conserving species or ecosystems, it's also having impact on people in South Africa, as well as providing opportunities to preserve those elements of biodiversity. And as I've mentioned, I think twice now, we produce indicators that are used to report at the national as well as the global level to those different signatories that we are part of, but also to monitor and to see how are we progressing to reach the targets that we've agreed on. Then the NBA also provides an opportunity to identify key issues. So from what the data is providing, what are the key issues that need to be raised, that we need to educate people on, as well as where do we need to raise funds to be able to have impact. Then the NBA also provides a platform for collaboration that I'll talk about in the next slide, and also opportunity for capacity building. The 3 presenters tonight, myself included, started as being part of the NBA as interns within the SANBI context, and many other organizations where students have been involved, they've actually been capacitated through this assessment process. It also provides an opportunity to use this data and these analysis to identify crucial data and knowledge gaps that stimulate future research. And Shlingiwe will later show you where we've expanded on the taxonomic groups that we're assessing based on things that we found in the previous assessment. So the MBA is not a standalone or an independent product of SANBI. It is a massive collaborative effort from many different institutions, many individuals contributing their time within work and outside of work hours. It's also not something that has come about within, we call it the MBA 2025, but it's really a work that has been built over many years since the last NBA. So since 2020, we've been starting to collect new data, building new analysis to be able to produce this NBA. So many different organizations involved, different government departments, universities, as well as our NGOs, and also illustrating the importance of NGOs and their role in supporting these assessment processes. And then I just like to highlight South Africa is really trailblazing in this assessment realm, where this National Biodiversity Assessment approach that we use, it's really unique, and it's a South African developed process. We've been doing this since, I think, 2011. I might correct myself later, but I think it's almost 20 years now where we've been conducting this assessment and really trailblazing in creating this type of analysis. Mapale will expand later on our wall-to-wall ecosystem map that we have. And that's also a world first for a mega diverse country. Because of all of that work, there's now the mapping of biodiversity priorities, guidelines that's been developed through the MBA process in collaboration with the French Development Agency, and also a course where other countries can also repeat this analysis to be able to implement it in their countries. So the form of the NBA, previously we had many technical reports that have all the detail, all the maps, all the data sets, and a synthesis report, which was a book which was printed. This time around, we still have the synthesis book, but we've moved online so that we are able to more regularly update the analysis and the results, so that when there's new data, we're able to rerun analysis, and also for transparency. So within this website context, we have our technical reports linked. You're able to go into the GitHub to see the analysis and the workflows that have been used. So I invite everybody to access this link, explore the website, and learn more. So now you know how and why the NBA is done. The next slides will focus on what the findings is of the 2025 NBA. We report, you've heard a lot now about indicators. So our main indicators is status. So what is the status of species? What is the status of our ecosystems? And we use the IUCN Global Standard methodology for assessing these. We also have protection level indicators, and these, specifically the species protection level, is something that we in South Africa have developed. It stems from a workshop in 2016 in collaboration with all our conservation agencies and our species experts, thinking about how do we measure protection for species. It's not just it occurs in a protected area, but is the protected area effective in protecting the species? So this work is also trailblazing, South Africa producing it for one of the first mega diverse countries to be able to produce it. So I'm handing over now to Mapale to give you more details on our ecosystem analysis.
Great. Thank you very much, Dean, for that introduction and overview. I don't see any immediate questions in the chat, but I have asked our audience, they are more than welcome to pop questions in the chat. Obviously, you highlight decades of hard work that went in here, but maybe we'll just go over to Mapale for the ecosystem overview on the NBA. Thank you, Mapale.
Thank you, Martina. Good afternoon, everyone. For this presentation, I will be building on Dev's overview on how the NBA supports various national and international reporting processes. And as well as, for this section, I'll then focus on the key findings generated from the various national headline indicators that are adopted in the NBA. So so I just wanted to request if I can just switch off the camera because of the background light. So Martin, can I just switch off the camera?
Yeah, go ahead, that's fine.
All right, no, thank you. All right, so the NBA uses a subset of Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework headline indicators alongside the National Development Headline Indicator to report on the state of the country's biodiversity at an ecosystem level. So these headline indicators include the red list of ecosystem, commonly known as ecosystem threat status, which is applied across all realms and zones. So its application across geographic areas of different sizes reflect on its flexibility, while providing a consistent and scientifically defensible assessment approach in measuring how close our ecosystems are to collapsing when exposed to either a single or multiple threatening processes. Right? The next global indicator is the Red List Index, which relies solely on the Red List assessment of ecosystem. And this indicator is designed to track genuine changes in ecosystem threat status over time. So in addition to this global headline indicator, we also have a national headline indicator that is designed by South Africa. And this is called, or we know it as ecosystem protection level, and it has been used since 2005. And its design is mainly to measure how well our ecosystem types are represented within the protected area network. Next. So this headline indicator, in terms of its application, it consists of a set of 5 criteria that assesses different ways in which an ecosystem type may be threatened. So we have criterion A and B on your left figure. So criterion A and B assesses special symptoms of ecosystem collapse, while criterion C and D focuses on the functional symptoms. And lastly, we have criterion E, which uses simulation models to estimate the probability of ecosystem collapse. So for the NBA 2025, a subset of these criteria was applied in each realm, depending on the data availability. However, across all realms, criterion A was assessed to evaluate the risk of collapse due to habitat loss. Furthermore, criterion B was also applied to many of our realms, ecosystem realms, and that is because of this criteria mainly targets ecosystem types that are small in extent and are subject to spatial or functional declines. For criterion C and D, a strategic assessment approach was adopted due to the lack of a wall-to-wall map or especially explicit map on environmental degradation and biotic disruption data. This data, however, does exist, but is fragmented, making it challenging to comprehensively assess the severity of the degrading pressures as well as their extent across realms. So for the terrestrial realm, this data limitation is addressed through the SPEP project. And this project is led by SANBI and is aimed at developing a national special database on ecosystem condition and integrity that is fit for the purpose of improving the rate list of ecosystem assessment. Next. Okay, so findings from the NBA 2025 reveal that more than 60% of South Africa's ecosystem types are not threatened, and with aquatic and coastal ecosystem being the most severely impacted. And this is evident in our wetlands, rivers, and estuaries, which are under immense pressure from disrupted freshwater flows and the declining water quality, with fishing adding additional pressure on our estuarine ecosystems. So since 2018, we have observed a continuing, or our system continue to decline, and with coastal ecosystem types now classified as highly threatened. So on land, the terrestrial assessment confirmed trends that were first observed in 2018, with a new invasive alien plant data revealing that some ecosystem types are under greater threat than previously recognized. Furthermore, updates to the national vegetation map also resulted in some minor changes, resulting in some ecosystem types changing in status. On the other hand, the 2018 and the 2025 marine ecosystem assessment result differ slightly, and that is due to the marine ecosystem map, which now distinguishes between pelagic and benthic ecosystems. Furthermore, for the marine ecosystem assessment, a full range of, or a wider range rather, of red list of ecosystem criteria were considered, resulting in these differences in status. So across all realms, the message is clear and consistent, and that is ecosystem condition is declining and the threats are continuing to increase. Next. Next. Yeah. So while conditions are worsening across all realms, the risk of ecosystem collapse is not uniform. And that is because there are several factors that play a role. Apart from the pressures themselves, ecosystem size or footprint, as well as its location within the landscape, also matters, right? For example, an ecosystem types that is widely distributed or occur in multiple independent patches are inherently more resilient, and they are less likely to be overwhelmed by either a single or multiple threatening process. And this is evident in the Namakaru, where less threatened, where their ecosystem are less threatened than the small fynbos ecosystem type. Similarly, the offshore ecosystems are less threatened than the inshore. Next. Okay, now focusing on the results from the terrestrial biome. So the fynbos and the grassland biome are the most affected by human-driven pressures, with over half of the fynbos ecosystem and a third of grassland ecosystem types listed as threatened. And these cover roughly a quarter of the remaining natural habitat, while Indian Ocean coastal belt has been listed as the most threatened biome in the country, with all of its ecosystem types at risk of collapse, while the Namakaru remains least threatened. Next. So the next global indicator is the red list, the red list index of ecosystems. As previously mentioned, this indicator tracks real or genuine changes in ecosystem threat status over time, and it's mirrored both conceptually and in its application to the red list index of species. Right? So it scores, it uses scores, and they range between 0 and 1, and where zero indicate that all ecosystem type within a group have collapsed, and 1 suggesting that they are all least threatened. So far, this indicator has only been applied to terrestrial ecosystem due to the availability of temporal national land cover data that allowed us to track changes over time. While the goal is to apply it across all realms, it's largely dependent on the data availability. Basically a reliable temporal pressures data. That's what we need to apply this criteria. So notably, South Africa, alongside what is it now called? Alongside Colombia, is among the first countries to report on this indicator. And our examples are featured in the United Nations CBD guidance to demonstrate how other countries can apply this indicator. Now, turning into looking at the left figure, the results reveal that there is a slow but steady decline in South African terrestrial ecosystem. And some of these ecosystems are already under severe pressure, and most notably is the Indian Ocean coastal belt and the fynbos biome. And that is clear, and it's also clear on the map, whereby the darker areas indicate high rates of habitat loss. Next. So, and then the last indicator that is adopted in the NBA is the ecosystem protection level. And the figure on the left shows the percentage of the number of ecosystem types in each protection level category per realm, while on the right shows the percentage of natural extent. Overall, a quarter of these ecosystem types are well protected, and while the other quarter remains entirely unprotected, highlighting significant gaps in our conservation coverage, right? Aquatic ecosystem that is our rivers, our wetlands, and also estuaries are least protected, and this makes sense because of many of the pressures on this ecosystem originate upstream, where the protected areas have little reach, especially where water flow and quality are affected. Right? So despite these gaps, there are some success stories, right? So in 2019, 20 new marine protected areas covering 83% of the marine ecosystem types within just 5% of the EEZ shows that they're protected. This shows highly effective network that protects ecosystem while using minimal space. On land, protection has expanded through biodiversity stewardship programs, increasing the area under formal conservation. Next. So across all realms, a concerning proportion of ecosystem remain both highly threatened and inadequately protected, with 70% of the marine realm and a quarter of the terrestrial realm ecosystem, and a third of coastal and aquatic ecosystem. Coastal and aquatic ecosystem being underprotected and threatened, and these gaps highlight where conservation efforts are mostly needed. Next. So in conclusion, biodiversity faces a wide range of pressures that vary across realms, from land use change to resource extraction to climate change and alien invasive species. Many of this stems from, many of these activities are activities that we depend on, highlighting a fundamental tension between human needs and the healthy ecosystems. Right? Critically, this pressure they rely in isolation. They really act in isolation, and they interact and amplify one another, right? Producing impacts that are far greater than any single pressure alone. So while this is complex, and we do acknowledge that we are not yet, or we don't fully understand, it is also important to acknowledge that these are the areas that needs to be addressed and will require an integrated approach that considers the pressures interacting across all realms, as well as collective commitment that we should act before it's too late. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Hlengi, who will talk more about species indicators and their key findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mapale. While Hlengiwe is getting ready, I just want to briefly outline some of the questions in the chat. Thank you, Mapale. Really insightful work, and congratulations on covering all the ecosystem findings, quite in detail there. There's one question from Karen in the chat. So Karen is asking whether bees were included in the assessment. And I don't know, any of the speakers is welcome to respond, but Debadine, maybe help me if I'm correct on page 3. I'm sitting with a copy looking at page 3, and there's a figure 2 in the key findings and summary document where all the taxa and the organisms are outlined, and I believe bees were included in the assessment.
No, so not yet. So it's still a gap area. It was identified in 2018. So pollinators is on the to-do list. We are actively engaging. There has been some delays in completing the assessment, but we're busy with at least a sample of our bees, so not all of our bee species. And then for our honeybee, we're also looking at conducting a resource assessment because it's an economically important species. So for all our bees, we're doing a sample assessment, and then for the honeybees, the two subspecies, we're aiming to do a resource assessment. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just want to acknowledge there is a question about pangolins also in the chat, and there's been a response by Colleen Simo. On that, the best place to point you to, Siyabonga, is probably to the EWT, the Endangered Wildlife Trust. But pangolins are probably the most trafficked animal in the world, and according to CITES regulations, they are not meant to be kept in captivity. Yeah, so science or research also shows that they don't have high survival rates in captivity. So please, if there's anyone that would like to report these kind of things, the best organization is the Endangered Wildlife Trust. There's quite a few other questions in the chat, but I'm going to pause there and ask our speakers maybe to respond to some of the other questions that relate to the content of their presentations. And then Shlengiwe, just to keep you time, we're going to hand over to you. So thank you very much. We're ready to go.
Thank you, Martina. Let's just dive straight in. For the species status, we have used the IUCN Red List categories and criteria, which is a global standard to assess the species risk of extinction. And you can see here that there are a few more categories for species than for the ecosystems. So the larger circles are the entire taxonomic groups, while the smaller circles are the South African endemics in each group. In the previous NBA, which is the 2018 assessment, we evaluated 12 taxonomic groups. And in this NBA, we increased the number to 16. A big change has been in the increase of the invertebrate representation. And in 2018, it was one of the findings that there's a gap in our understanding of invertebrate status in South Africa. So for this reason, it was included, they were included. In this assessment, we also included freshwater and terrestrial invertebrates, and also expanded in some of the marine RAM groups. The most threatened taxonomic groups were freshwater fishes and the cartilaginous fishes, which are sharks, rays, and chimeras. Then for freshwater fishes, this reflects the state of our freshwater ecosystems. South Africa has a large proportion of endemic freshwater fishes. About 50% of those are endemic, and many of them have very restricted distribution ranges. And that makes pressures like alien invasive fishes very challenging. For the cartilaginous fishes, about 43% are threatened with extinction, including 6 of South Africa's 13 endemic shark species. That places the full responsibility on us for their protection. Next slide, please. Thank you. The bubble plot that you see, it shows the main drivers of threats to species, and it is based on the metadata that is recorded during the Red List assessment processes. And the size of the bubble is the percentage of species in the taxonomic group that is affected by the given pressures. This highlights the importance of citizen science in documenting what is happening on the ground. Had it not been for them, I don't think it would also be possible for us to do this analysis. So if we look, for example, at freshwater fishes, more than 50% of the threatened species are impacted by the invasive species, habitat alterations, pollutions, and agriculture. And again, if you look across multiple taxonomic groups, natural system modifications, in agriculture appear again as the main drivers of threats. What is also important to note here is that some of the groups, across the groups, there is an emerging threat, which is climate change. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the first slide, we increased the representation of groups. And here, these are the 3 groups that we assessed for the first time. And they include the spiders, fairy shrimps, and freshwater crabs. Fairy shrimps or anastraka are the important indicators of temporary freshwater systems like pens, wetlands, or even roadside ditches. And our submission of the 36 anastraka species assessments to the IUCN Red List contributed 58% of the global anastraka IUCN assessments. So once again, South Africa is a leader when it comes to this. South Africa also is the first country to assess a selection of 20 sandy beach invertebrates, and many of these are endemic to South Africa. And about 35% of the species are now assessed as threatened or near threatened. And what came out is that the major pressures on these include coastal developments, artificial lights at night, which disrupts their biological rhythms, as well as mining. Next slide, please. Similarly to the ecosystem, we also look at the trends in species red list assessments. And in the graph, 1 means species are not threatened, and 0 means that the species are extinct. And you can see from the graph that some of the assessments, they date back to 1990, and they are allowing us the time frame to examine the trends. There's also, unfortunately, a marked increase in the rate at which the species are becoming more threatened since the last assessments. You can notice this from the decreasing slopes of graph lines. For example, you can see the lines of reptiles and plants, as well as mammals. They are declining very sharply since the last assessment. And a lot of the declines are mainly due to climate change and the loss of habitat. Many of the plant species have also been uplisted, and this has been due to the increase in pressures found in arid regions of the country, which is the western regions of the country. Bird declines have also been largely due to many freshwater birds being impacted by the levels of pollutions and other forms of habitat degradation. It is also worth noting that the freshwater fishes, as well as the newly assessed sharks, have the lowest red list index they use, which is at the bottom of the graph. Next slide, please. For plants, we can also disaggregate the species stage status by the biomes. This was done only for a random sample of 900 plant taxa. And this graph shows plants in different biomes. And here you can see the desert biome, which is the yellow line, and the succulent karoo, the green line, that they are showing a very sharp decline. This is due to the interactions of pressures in the arid zone, in the more arid biomes. And the pressures which are driving these include climate change, illegal harvesting of plants, as well as the escalating mining, as well as renewable energy developments. Next slide, please. Getting onto the protection level indicator. For the species protection level indicator, we also looked at the groups that are doing relatively well. We look at the species that are doing relatively well with this index analysis. A total of 70% of plant species were found to be well protected. And again, the protection level analysis for plants was based only on the sample of 900 plants. All the mammals, the reptiles, the birds, amphibians, and freshwater fish species were assessed. And overall, they are well protected. Looking at the freshwater fishes, we can see that they are not as protected as other groups, as many species are impacted by pressures that occur outside protected areas upstream, for example. And it is also important to note that if we do the protection level analysis only for threatened species, then the picture looks very, very different. For example, less than 30% of the threatened amphibians, mammals, and plant species are well protected. The good news is that several species have improved in their protection level status. For example, this rare range restricted species, which is at the bottom right of the slide, which occurs from the Namaqualand and has a very rare and range restricted distribution. It has experienced a genuine improvement in its protection level. This is mainly due to the declaration of the protected areas between 2018 and 2025. Similarly, several bird species, amphibians, mammals, and freshwater fishes, as well as reptile species, have also improved in their status. Next slide, please. Looking closer at the protection level for plants, our colleague, Dr. Lisa van Staden, conducted a protection level analysis for plants. And the good news that came out of this is that the protection level of plants have improved, as I've mentioned in the previous slide, but there's a notable proportion of plant species that are still not protected, and it's about 14%, which is the second highest proportion after the freshwater fishes. The bar charts that you see shows the protection level between 2017 and 2024. And it shows that the protection state has improved for at least 7% of the taxa, but it also deteriorated for 1% of the taxa. And the increase in protection level is driven by both the expansion of protected areas as well as the improvement in the management effectiveness, meaning protected areas are not only expanding, but they are also being better managed. And for further details on the protection level, please visit the NBA website where you'd get details and how the analysis was done. Next slide, please. These are the two groups that face very high levels of threats, and they are also poorly protected. They therefore require the urgent need and targeted recovery interventions. So in response to Target 4 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which calls on countries to halt species extinction, South Africa has initiated engagements with taxon experts to identify species that are in urgent need of recovery actions. So in one of the analyses, when the prioritization was done for the species recovery, was to intersect the species stress status together with the species protection level, which in the end gives the species that are highly threatened or underprotected. And these are the species that are given or are identified as needing the most urgent conservation actions. So across all the other taxon groups, 127 taxa fall within this category, and 80% of these are South African endemics. As mentioned, the freshwater fishes as well as the amphibians are highly threatened. They also came up as the highest proportion. They also had the highest proportion of species falling under this category. And about 5% of plant species and close to 10% of all assessed mammal species are both highly threatened and underprotected. So in the next slides, I'll be showing examples of the species recovery work that is currently underway in South Africa. Next slide, please. So through the prioritization process, which was done in around 2020, 293 plant species have been identified as needing agent recovery. And this is one of the examples of a recovery project that is currently underway in the Cape of a Marismodus species, which is a small genus in the daisy family, and which is also highly threatened by habitat loss. Since then, or since 2022, over 600 plants have been propagated through the collaboration efforts between the Stellenbosch University Botanical Garden and SANBI, South African National Biodiversity Institute, working together with the citizen science under the scientists under the Custodians of Rare and Endangered Wildflowers program, which is a program under SANBI. The propagation began with very few clones, and they were grown from a small batch of seed banked in around, I think, 2009, if not 2010. And this is also highlighting the value of the Millennium Seed Bank. In 2023, 2 of the wild plants were also found and they were propagated and also added to the FC2 collection. 148 plants were reintroduced into suitable sites, and they had an 80% survival rate through the recent dry summer. So the project combined passive and active interventions, where mowing of dead roots running through the site was stopped and allowing natural repollination, as well as alien invasive plants were being removed, and there were ecological bans that were conducted in early 2025. All this work has been made possible with the support from the Mapula Trust, the Botanical Society of South Africa, as well as the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. Next slide, please. These are the 2 success stories of species recovery that are featured in the NBA, but it's not only these 2, all the other taxon groups have success stories, and please visit the NBA website to read more on this. So the white winged flathead is a critically endangered species. This is due to high rate loss of preferred habitat. However, its protection level has improved from not being protected to poorly protected due to concerted efforts to expand protected areas in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. The second one, which is the Pig's real frog, the biodiversity management plan for this species, is also showing some success, with the species now being downlisted from critically endangered to endangered. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over back to David Dean for the genetic diversity findings.
Thank you, Hlengiwe. David Dean, while you get ready, I just want to, so I am trying to be mindful of time with the few minutes we have left, but David Dean, we will definitely give you your time. Thank you very much, Hlengiwe. I think from both the 3 presentations we've seen so far, we will very likely have to do a follow-up session because it's just such a dense body of work, and also the questions, we're going to have to apologize that we cannot answer all these questions to the level of detail perhaps that they deserve attention or a full response on. But if one of our SANBI speakers could potentially just pop the email for the NBA team in the chat, there is obviously a team that can then respond in more detail. I think it's nba@sanbi.org.za. David Dean.
Yes, maybe Mapale or Hlengiwe can confirm and just paste it in the chat.
Great, thank you very much. And then I just want to say we're not going to share the presentations from today's webinar directly, but just a reminder for everyone that the webinar will be available on the BOTSOC YouTube channel in the next couple of days if anyone would like to recap some of the results and messages that were shared here today. But I'm going to hand over to Devadine again, because the real novelty aspect, there's many, but one of them is really the genetic component that went into this assessment. Thank you, Devadine.
Thank you, Martina. So I'll just summarize the genetic findings. So one thing to highlight is that in 2018, South Africa was one of the first countries that identified the need to assess our genetic risk and our genetic diversity of our species. And in this NBA, we've developed now 4 indicators which are aligned to the global biodiversity framework. So we're able to report at the global level. And some of our scientists, Dr. Jessica Da Silva, is part of that global group developing these indicators. So it's really something to be proud of as South Africans. So I'm not a geneticist, so I'm just going to be broad with these results. There's a full NBA genetics section that you can read through that Jessica has authored, and where you can find all of these details. The take-home message for our findings is that we've only assessed a few species, as you can see with our first these two indicators, so population maintained and population effective population. So these are below the species level to give you an idea of what's happening at the population level, because species don't go extinct as a whole. It is lost one population at a time. So we need to know what's happening at the population level. So as you can see, only 61 species assessed, 90 species assessed. So we really need to assess more species, a broader range of species, to get a better idea of what's happening. Then the other 2 indicators, the other 2 indicators is based on to measure South Africa's genetic heritage. So looking at the proportion of South Africa's evolutionary history that may be lost if we lose these specific threatened species. So specifically looking at reptiles and amphibians, these 2 groups show high levels of endemism, and we have comprehensive genetic profiles for this group. And in this analysis, it was found that without conservation actions, 6.5% of our amphibian phylogenetic diversity and 5% of reptile phylogenetic diversity could be lost in the next 50 years if there isn't interventions for those specific species at risk. So ultimately, these indicators reveal a silent genetic declines and vulnerabilities in our biodiversity. And this also underscores the urgency of addressing this before it translates into irreversible biodiversity loss. So still lots of work to be done, but it's a first step of measuring what the state of genetic diversity is in South Africa. So the NBA, so you've heard now of some of the results, the main indicators, but essentially we need to have key messages that we take to the different sectors, because we need the whole of society to be part of preserving and protecting our biodiversity. So our key messages have been developed into 3 clusters. So cluster A has to do with across realm pressures and how it's impacting people. So preserving our biodiversity and how it's impacting people if we're not. Cluster B has to do with improving the status of South Africa's biodiversity as key for sustainable and equitable future for all South Africans. And then cluster C has to do with being inclusive and having inclusive actions across government, across society, to secure nature, to contribute to people's existence. So just a broad summary of these key messages. Here we focus on this is what the data is providing, where the pressures are, and how it translates to impacting the lives of ordinary South Africans. So these are the areas that we need to work on. You saw the results from the ecosystems, where our freshwater and our aquatic ecosystems are really under pressure. And this also links to from land to sea. What happens on the land impacts what happens on this in our oceans. And that again translates to fisheries, opportunities for people. So everything essentially showing that how everything is interconnected being one of our key messages. So each of these messages you can delve deeper on our website, where each of these are explained what it is, where it's coming from, and what is our possible response to these pressures. Cluster B, looking at the messages that explains the trends in our headline indicators and other metrics in the NBA. Here too, we look at success stories and also our major challenges. And I think Shringiwe has highlighted and Mapale has highlighted those successes where there has been expansion in protected areas, where species need to be protected, where we have had gains in genetic monitoring and some very innovative work when it comes to some of our species recovery, especially where funding is limited. In a developing country, we're still able to do these things, even though it's not great for all of our species, but where it has taken place, we need to celebrate that. And we've got lots of messages around how we can improve the status of species, how we can improve the status of ecosystems by doing small things that would add up to have large impacts. Then, so what can be done? In cluster C of the messages, we pick up on a few overarching ideas to address the many negative trends in biodiversity and our ecosystem health, and try to find ways how can we address it. The big new trend word is whole of society, whole of government, whole of ordinary people. So everybody being involved in the solution. It's not just coming from one side. We need investment in biodiversity monitoring. I think all of what you saw earlier is linked to data that's been generated from observations, from citizen scientists, from research projects. All of these things need funding. So we really need to be able to invest in monitoring so that we can have data to measure where we are and what the state of biodiversity is. And that links up to C3, where we need to be innovative. We can't just be dependent on government funding. And we're really grateful for all of our NGOs that are able to support the work that we do, and also to support where there's recovery work or rehabilitation. So really thinking about how can we be innovative about funding some of the pressures and risk that we've identified. And then this has been, as I mentioned earlier, it's been a 20-year journey, from a single spatial assessment now to a website filled with lots of data, links that you can go deeper if you want to. You can look at what's the key message and how you can get involved as an ordinary South African, just an interested person, because everybody's role contributes to the overall outcome. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening and for staying with us. And as Martina said, we might need to delve a little bit deeper. And I think it might be a good idea to invite some of the leads on those specific analysis where people want more information and are interested in it. So I'm going to try and take some time to answer some of the questions while I hand over to Martina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David Dean. Yeah, well done to the SANBI team. I would be curious to know, just in a nutshell, how many people or teams were involved in putting this together, but I don't think that's something that you can easily put a figure on. I'd like to thank everyone, like David Dean said, for staying with us this evening. Mapale and Hlengiwe, you're welcome to switch on your cameras if you like, just to sort of wave us goodbye. And I'd like to thank our three speakers very much for their time and the hard work that have come into this or gone into this webinar, but we will definitely look into a follow-up session. This was very much just the overview and to give people a little bit of, you know, exposure to the NBA assessment that was launched about 2 months ago, but I think it was at the beginning of December last year. Just a reminder for all the audience, you're welcome to recap the webinar on our BOTSOC resources channel. I've put the link in the chat there, and it should be available in the next couple of days. Just give us a bit of time to stitch it together and to upload it. And yeah, I think from my side, then that's it. Our next webinar will be again at the last Thursday in March. And Cherise Viljoen will be the host of that webinar. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone there. Thank you very much, ladies, for your time. Have a wonderful evening. And I'm sure you're going to be getting a few questions on the NBA email. And we'll look for what kind of, sort of an angle we have to take for a follow-up session potentially later in the year. All the best with the good work. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.